The room felt so quiet, it almost scolded me, and I wondered if emptiness could heal, or if it just echoed louder when you finally stopped filling it. I began this challenge thinking I wanted less, but the first morning revealed something stranger. Every object I didn't buy left a small tremor inside me, like my hands were waiting for a weight they could no longer justify. I caught myself scanning the corners of my home the way some people check their phones, searching for a distraction I no longer allowed myself. The stillness felt heavy, almost personal, and it shocked me how quickly craving showed up when nothing else did. I thought simplicity would feel clean, but instead it felt like standing in bright light with no shadows to hide behind. And in that brightness I felt exposed, as if the silence itself was watching me. I told myself the challenge officially began the moment I threw away the half-formed habit of checking my phone for sales. But the truth is, it began before that. In the quiet guilt that made me want this change. I stood in my kitchen feeling the strange fullness of not choosing anything new to bring into my life. It surprised me how quickly my thoughts tried to bargain, offering little exceptions and harmless justifications. The morning carried a faint thrill, like walking into cold water, and I felt proud without knowing why. The idea that I could go a whole day without reaching for the comfort of wanting something felt like a small spark of control. Yet, the emptiness around me made that control feel delicate, thin, easily cracked. I held on to it anyway, pretending it was enough. By noon, the thrill had faded, replaced by a restlessness that clung to me like humidity. I kept catching myself reaching for my bag, as if some forgotten errand waited outside. It startled me how automatic the impulse felt, as though buying something had always been my way of pausing the world for a moment. Without it, the hours stretched wider, slower, revealing thoughts I usually outtrain. I walked through my apartment feeling like a guest in my own space, noticing how every corner had once been filled with distractions I mistook for comfort. The silence felt different now, heavier, inviting me to listen. And in that listening, I realized how much of my day was spent wanting without noticing the wanting itself. It was a strange kind of hunger that had nothing to do with objects at all. By mid-afternoon, the quiet revealed things I didn't expect. I found myself remembering old evenings when I'd buy something small, just to feel like the day had meaning. I called it treating myself. But now the truth stepped forward. It wasn't a treat, it was an escape. Without that small escape today, emotions moved closer, unblinking. I felt waves of unease brushing against memories I usually buried beneath new objects. The challenge I thought would make me lighter instead exposed weight I'd been carrying for years. I wondered how many moments I'd skipped by filling them with things instead of attention. The emptiness around me felt like a mirror, showing me how much I had avoided feeling. And in that recognition, a thin crack of honesty opened, sharp and unmistakable. As evening approached, a strange anticipation formed in my chest like a warning I couldn't interpret. The day had stretched me thin, yet something about the quiet pulled me forward instead of pushing me away. I sensed a shift coming, though I couldn't name its shape. I walked through my home, noticing how the simplest objects, the chair, the glass, the folded sweater, felt like companions rather than clutter. But beneath that calm, a subtle tension hummed, as if some unseen thread between desire and discipline was tightening. I felt watched by my own thoughts, by the parts of me that weren't ready to let go. The sun lowered, shadows grew longer, and in that half-darkness, I felt the first whisper of temptation, quiet but unmistakable, calling from just beyond the edges of the day. The next morning carried a strange ease, as though the first hard layer of wanting had cracked overnight. I woke feeling lighter, almost proud, like someone who had finally broken a small but stubborn habit. I made coffee without thinking about the things I usually wanted to add to my life, and for a moment, the simplicity felt like a quiet victory. The silence didn't feel as sharp today. Instead, it felt like a soft room I could breathe inside. I walked through my home with the sense that I had survived something invisible, as if the first day was meant to challenge my reflexes, and now those reflexes were slower, gentler, easier to ignore. Yet beneath that pride was a new awareness. Change wasn't something that happened in a single day. It pulsed gradually, like a tide returning to shore. Later, that morning, Jonah dropped by, bringing his usual bright energy into the quiet space like someone opening a window. He asked how the challenge was going, and I heard myself speak with a kind of careful optimism. His encouragement felt grounding, almost too warm for how fragile my confidence still was. I watched his face as I talked, looking for any sign of doubt, but instead I found a steady belief I wasn't sure I deserved yet. The pride I felt earlier grew a little, but so did an unexpected fear that I might disappoint him if I slipped. His presence reminded me that simplicity wasn't just a private promise. It shaped how I showed up with the people who cared about me. For a moment, I wished progress didn't feel so visible. As the day unfolded, I began noticing the small impulses that used to slip past my attention. Every time I reached for my phone without purpose, every time my mind wandered to something new I could buy, I felt a faint jolt of awareness. It wasn't painful, just revealing, like catching myself in a lie I'd told so many times it felt natural. I realized how automatic my wanting had become. It was a reflex, not a choice. The more I watched it, the stranger it felt, as if I were seeing an old habit from the outside for the first time. There was a subtle power in recognizing it, a quiet sense of reclaiming something I didn't know I had lost. And yet, these small awakenings also made me uneasy, because they showed me how deep the pattern ran. By afternoon, the quiet around me felt different, almost soothing. I moved through my home and felt the absence of clutter like a soft breeze brushing past. For the first time in a long while, the space felt like somewhere I wanted to be rather than somewhere I hid from. I began to sense the possibility of living with less, not as punishment but as relief. The surfaces looked calmer, the light clearer, the air somehow lighter. It was as if removing noise from the room made room for breath inside. It felt like the beginning of trust, not in the challenge, but in myself. And that quiet trust felt fragile, like a flame sheltered between cupped hands. But with the space around me growing lighter, something unexpected stirred in my mind. The quieter my home became, the louder my thoughts felt. It was as if clearing the physical room stripped away the distractions I had always used as padding. With nothing left to soften the edges, old worries crept back in, sharper than before. I found myself pacing slowly, feeling a pressure build inside me that I could neither name nor ignore. Simplicity, I was learning, wasn't just peaceful. It was confronting. It pushed me towards silence I wasn't ready for. And in that silence, I began to realize that the challenge wasn't about resisting things outside of me. It was about facing the things that surfaced when the outside no longer drowned them out. It appeared on a late afternoon when the light thinned into that soft golden haze that makes everything feel important. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't even thinking about the challenge. I was just walking past a small boutique window near my building when something caught my eye with a force that felt almost physical. It was simple. Quiet, nothing extraordinary, yet I froze as if it had spoken my name. The moment stretched strangely, a pull forming inside me that I couldn't explain. I felt my breath catch, not from desire exactly, but from recognition. It was as if the object had slipped through the small cracks of my resolve and touched something deeper than want. I knew immediately this wasn't just temptation. It was a sign that something inside me was waking up. I stood there longer than I want to admit, staring at something that should not have mattered. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't rare. It wasn't anything I needed. Yet, the feeling that washed over me was oddly familiar, like the beginning of a story I had lived too many times. My heart beat faster, not with excitement, but with a strange tenderness, as if the object promised something soft something structured, something safe. I felt a tiny ache behind my ribs, the kind that appears when a desire masks something deeper. I could hear my mind rushing to justify, weaving thin threads of excuses. But for the first time, I recognized the pattern forming. This wasn't about the planner at all. It was about the comfort I believed it would give me, the illusion of order in a life I hadn't fully faced. On the walk home, the justifications started lining up neatly in my mind, like obedient soldiers ready to defend me. I told myself it was a tool, not a purchase. I convinced myself it would help me stay organized during the challenge. I even whispered that it didn't count if it made me better. Each thought felt reasonable, yet somewhere inside I felt the truth squirm. These weren't reasons. They were rehearsed excuses, the same ones I had used for years without knowing it. I felt both ashamed and oddly amused at how quickly the old patterns returned. The planner wasn't the problem. The story I was writing about it was. And even as I recognized the lie, part of me still wanted to believe it. Later that night, the planner returned to my mind with a strange clarity. I found myself imagining how it would feel in my hands, how the pages might soften over time, how neatly my days would unfold if I wrote inside it. I pictured mornings where I felt collected, evenings where I felt steady. None of these images involved the object itself. They were fantasies of who I wished I could be. I realized that the planner had become a symbol, a promise that order could be bought instead of built. And that promise felt dangerously comforting. I lay awake feeling the tug of it, both gentle and insistent, as if it whispered that I didn't have to change myself if I could just purchase the illusion of change. The next morning, I hid the truth from Jonah before he even asked. It wasn't that he would judge me. It was that he would understand me too well. I didn't want him to see how quickly the temptation had sunk its hooks into me. When he asked how the challenge was going, I smiled too fast, the kind of smile that trembles if held too long. I realized then that the planner had become more than a want. It had become a secret, and secrets always meant something deeper was stirring. I felt a knot tighten inside me, half fear, half desire, as if I were standing at the edge of a familiar cliff. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to step back or fall. The following day, the temptation sharpened into something heavier. It no longer felt like a passing thought, but like a presence trailing me, quiet and persistent. I tried distracting myself with chores, cleaning surfaces already spotless, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. But everything I did seemed to loop back to the planner, as if my mind was running in circles trying to find permission to want it. I felt my chest tighten each time the thought returned, the way a storm builds before breaking. I hadn't expected desire to feel this physical, this rooted. It wasn't longing for the thing itself anymore, but for the feeling it promised. And with each hour that passed, the distance between me and the purchase felt thinner, like a thread stretched too tight. That night I dreamed about the planner. Not about buying it, but about holding it. Opening its pages, writing thoughts that felt balanced and calm. The dream was warm and comforting, the kind that makes waking feel abrupt and disappointing. When I opened my eyes, the memory of the dream clung to me like a soft fabric. It felt unfair that something so small could carry such emotional weight. I lay there feeling both foolish and exposed, realizing the planner had slipped deeper into my mind than I intended. It wasn't just an object anymore. It had become a symbol of the order I wished my life had. Waking up without it left me with a quiet ache that pressed against the silence of the room. I tried to push the temptation away by busying myself with anything that didn't require thinking. I went for a long walk, cleaned the windows, reorganized drawers that barely held anything. But each task felt thin, like paper stretched over something pulsing underneath. The more I tried to distract myself, the more obvious the obsession became. I caught myself imagining excuses I could give Jonah, explanations I could offer myself. I realized distraction wasn't saving me. It was feeding the craving by pretending it wasn't there. My chest felt tight, my thoughts restless, as if the space inside me was squeezing itself smaller. I didn't want the planner anymore. I wanted the feeling of escape that wanting it gave me. By late afternoon, the pressure became too much. I sat on the floor, feeling the weight of every unspoken thought pressing down at once. My heart pounded faster than the situation deserved, and I felt my breath shorten. It was the kind of overwhelm that comes not from the object itself, but from everything it represented. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a mountain I had spent years avoiding, and suddenly the trail beneath my feet gave way. I let my head fall into my hands, feeling the sting of tears rise before I could stop them. It wasn't the planner I was crying about. It was everything I had used buying to hide from, and in that moment the simplicity I had chased felt almost cruel in its honesty. As evening settled in, I reached a breaking point. I opened my laptop, fingers hovering above the keys, ready to buy the planner just to escape the pressure inside me. My pulse raced as if the act itself would release something trapped. I could feel the old pattern rising, familiar and frightening. It wasn't about wanting anymore. It was about relief. For a few long seconds, I let myself believe that one small purchase wouldn't matter, that it would soothe the ache in my chest. But beneath that frantic want was a thin thread of awareness, a voice whispering that I was right on the edge of undoing everything. I stared at the screen, paralyzed between the person I had been and the person I was trying to become. As I sat frozen before the screen, a memory pushed through the noise. Unexpected, uninvited, but sharp enough to stop my breath. I saw myself years earlier, standing in a crowded store after a long, bitter argument with someone I cared about. I remembered the hollow feeling that settled in my chest, the way I grabbed the first notebook I saw, just to feel something other than the ache. I hadn't thought about that moment in years, yet now it rose with startling clarity. I wasn't addicted to things. I was addicted to escape, to the tiny rush of pretending I could restart myself with a new object each time life felt too heavy. The planner was only today's shape of the same old wound, and the truth of that hit me harder than the temptation ever had. The memory widened in me like a door swinging open. I could suddenly trace every moment when buying something had patched an emotional bruise I didn't want to look at. It wasn't about possessions. It was about comfort delivered in predictable shapes. I realized that each object I ever bought during those moments had acted like a shield, thin and temporary, allowing me to avoid the fear of sitting alone with my feelings. I felt the truth settle heavily in my chest. If I bought the planner now, I would be feeding the exact wound I claimed I wanted to heal. I wasn't just resisting a purchase. I was confronting a pattern that had kept me trapped for years, and knowing that made the moment feel unbearably intimate. I sat on the floor and let the silence come. No distractions, no excuses, no rushing away from the discomfort. At first it felt unbearable, like sitting in a room with someone I'd been avoiding for years, myself. But little by little, the sharpness softened. I realized I wasn't breaking, I was finally listening. I felt the ache beneath the temptation, the sadness I kept covering with new objects, the fear that still lived in the empty spaces of my life. And for the first time, instead of running from it, I stayed. The moment felt raw, painful, but honest in a way I hadn't touched in years. The craving began to loosen, not because I fought it, but because I finally understood it. And that understanding felt like the first honest breath I'd taken in days. When Jonah stopped by later, I felt the truth sitting so close to the surface that pretending seemed impossible. I told him everything. The temptation, the obsession, the fear, the memory that cracked open a part of me I hadn't touched in years. He didn't interrupt or judge. He simply listened, the way someone does when they care more about your honesty than your mistakes. I felt embarrassed at first, but then strangely relieved. Saying it out loud made the craving lose its power. It was no longer a secret twisting inside me. It was something shared, something seen. Jonah's quiet nod felt like an anchor pulling me back to myself. I realized that facing the truth wasn't as frightening when someone stayed beside me through it. Later that night, After the conversation and the tears and the slow rebuilding of my breath, I opened my laptop one last time. The shopping page was still there, the planner waiting like a quiet echo of who I used to be. But something inside me had shifted. The desire wasn't pulling anymore. The ache had softened. I stared at the screen, not with longing, but with clarity. I didn't need to buy anything to soothe myself. I didn't need a fresh start printed on new pages. I could choose a different beginning without owning a single new thing. With a calm I hadn't felt since the challenge began, I closed the laptop. Not with force, but with peace. And in that moment, the silence felt like a friend instead of a threat. The next morning felt strangely new, as if the air itself had shifted. I woke with a softness in my chest instead of the tight, buzzing need that had followed me for days. I walked through my home with the quiet curiosity of someone entering a space for the first time. Without the planner's pull, the rooms felt different. Lighter, clearer, almost honest. I found myself rearranging small things, not to distract myself this time, but to match the calm I felt inside. It wasn't about creating the perfect space. It was about choosing what actually supported me instead of what filled a void. Every small change, moving a chair, folding a blanket, opening a window, felt like a conversation with myself. And for the first time in a long time, the answer felt steady. Later in the day, I made myself sit in the silence I had spent years avoiding. No phone, no distraction, no task to hide inside. Just stillness. At first, it felt awkward, like sitting in the presence of someone I barely knew. But as minutes passed, something softened. I felt sensations I usually rushed past. My breath rising and falling, the faint ache behind my ribs, the quiet thrum of thoughts settling. The stillness wasn't empty after all. It was full of things I had pushed aside, full of feelings that had waited patiently for me to stop running. I realized simplicity wasn't about stripping life down to nothing. It was about allowing space for what actually mattered to come forward. And in that space, I found myself. As the hours passed, something unexpected began to bloom inside me. Peace. Not the sharp, fleeting kind I used to chase, but something slower, deeper. It came without effort, without reward, without objects. It felt like returning to a place I didn't know I'd left. I realized I could feel at ease without needing to fix anything, or acquire something new. That simple truth eased into me like warm light spreading across a room. For years, I had confused comfort with consumption, thinking they were the same. Now, sitting inside a moment that asked nothing of me, I understood the difference. The calm wasn't coming from outside. It was rising from within, quiet but steady, like a voice I had ignored finally speaking in full. By evening, my home felt like something new, not because I added anything, but because I finally let myself inhabit it. The space no longer felt empty. It felt spacious. Every corner held a kind of quiet invitation instead of a reminder of what I didn't have. I walked slowly through each room, noticing tiny details I always hurried past. The soft creaks in the floorboards, the gentle sway of the curtains, the way the air cooled as the sun lowered. It felt like rediscovering a home I had lived in for years but never really met. The simplicity around me wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like a gentle exhale, a clearing, a beginning. I realized I wasn't rebuilding my space. I was rebuilding my relationship with myself. As night settled, I realized something had shifted in a way I couldn't fully explain. I no longer felt like I was controlling myself or forcing restraint. I simply didn't feel the old pull anymore. The craving that once sat like a stone in my chest had dissolved into something gentler. Clarity, maybe, or trust. I understood now that discipline alone wasn't what freed me. It was honesty. Facing the truth beneath my desire had softened its grip. I didn't need distraction or purchase or escape. I could sit with myself and not feel lost. The The quiet that once terrified me now felt like a place I could return to, a place I could live in, a place that finally felt like mine. A week later, I passed the same boutique without meaning to. The evening light was soft and gold, and the air felt like the quiet breath between seasons. I didn't intend to look inside, but my eyes lifted on their own, and there it was, the planner. The same one that had twisted itself into my ribs just days before. But now, something was different. My chest didn't tighten. My thoughts didn't rush. The sight of it didn't stir anything frantic or aching. It simply existed, still and ordinary, no longer carrying the weight of my old patterns. I stood there a moment, surprised by my own calm. The object that once felt like a symbol of everything I lacked now looked like exactly what it was. An item behind glass. The meaning I had given it had dissolved, leaving only clarity in its place. I stepped closer, expecting some small flicker of desire to rise from the past, but nothing came, not even a whisper. It felt surreal, as though the part of me that once clung to the object had quietly unraveled and drifted away. I realized then that I hadn't lost anything by resisting it. I had gained a kind of inner steadiness I didn't know I was capable of. The planner no longer felt like a promise or a threat. It was simply a thing, unrelated to my worth or my sense of control. I felt a warmth spread through me, gentle and sure, because the silence inside didn't feel empty anymore. It felt whole. I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that I could walk away without a single piece of me pulling back. Walking away from the window felt like closing a chapter without force or ceremony. I didn't rush. I didn't celebrate. I simply walked, feeling the quiet settle around me like a soft blanket. With each step, the realization grew clearer. The challenge had never been about resisting purchases. It had been about meeting myself without the buffer of distraction. I felt taller somehow, not because anything around me had changed, but because I had finally faced what lived beneath the wanting. I understood now that desire wasn't the enemy. It was the signal. It pointed to wounds I hadn't tended, fears I hadn't named, comforts I had mistaken for healing. And now, for the first time, I felt ready to move through life without covering those truths with things. Back at home, the stillness greeted me like an old friend. I sat on the floor for a long time, letting the quiet surround me without needing to fill it. The simplicity of the room felt intentional now, not like something missing, but like something chosen. I realized minimalism was never about stripping life down to bare essentials. It was about creating space that reflected who I wanted to be, rather than the fear I carried. The emptiness in the room didn't echo anymore. It held me, supported me. I felt a sense of belonging inside my own life that I had never noticed before. It was gentle, soft, steady, a kind of homecoming I didn't know I'd been longing for. As night settled and the world outside dimmed into quiet, I felt something inside me echo with soft finality. Not the kind of ending that closes a door, but the kind that gently reveals a new one. I understood now that simplicity wasn't about owning less. It was about carrying less within myself. The challenge had shown me the spaces I filled with distraction and the truths I had buried beneath desire. And in facing them, I discovered a freedom I didn't know I was missing. I lay back on the gentle quiet of the room and let the stillness hold me. The question rose again: when you own nothing new, what still owns you? For the first time, the answer felt light, almost weightless. I finally felt free.